Welcome to Edge of Intelligence, where we explore how AI, automation, and digital transformation are reshaping operations, strategy, and impact, one conversation at a time. I'm Carl Owen, your host and fractional CIO and AI advisor at Protelligent. Today's guest is Scott Stout, a healthcare innovator and CEO of MedVector, a company that's bridging the gap between patients and clinical trials. MedVector is on a mission to bring clinical trials into the point of care setting, making research more accessible and participation more scalable. Scott, welcome to the show.
Hey, Carl, thanks for having me.
Sure. Let's start with your story. You're not just building a company, you're challenging the traditional clinical trial model. What inspired MedVector?
So there's a couple different pieces to this story. So, one of the most important one is I participated in a clinical trial when I was younger. I was in my late 20s and I lost the ability to walk, believe it or not. I am fully recovered now, and I golf and play tennis and ski and ride dirt bikes with my kids. But yeah, I was in bad shape, and my mom had to come take care of me, and it was difficult for me to even lean over to grab a remote. So I was in so much pain in my hips that my mom finally took me to the emergency room, and they took x-rays and said, "There's nothing wrong with you," and tried to send me home. And my mom finally said, "No, he's in so much pain, he can't walk. You need to figure out what's wrong with him." And so they admitted me, and I sat in that hospital for 5 days without a doctor seeing me. So I was admitted, I was upstairs, and finally a doctor walked by who had been seeing me there for a number of days, and he said, he popped his head and he said, "Has anybody seen you yet?" And I said, "No." And he said, "I think I know what's wrong with you. Can I be your doctor?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he prescribed an advanced medication that was still new, and I then participated in that clinical study. But after me taking that medicine, I was up and walking after about 2 hours. And I realized that I was very lucky to be in the right place at the right time. I live in Los Angeles, so we have advanced medicine here. I'm in a very, popular area, but the ER didn't know what to do with me, which means that most ERs wouldn't have known what to do with me. And it wasn't until this specialist came up and happened to see my chart and said, "I think I can help," that turned my life around, right? And so it's kind of a big deal when you've got something that's not working properly. It really is life-changing. You could have all the money in the world, but if you don't have your health, you can't enjoy it, right? So that was a big moment for me. Now, MedVector didn't happen until decades later,
Right.
but I'm sure that there's a piece of it in there that was a drive for me to start this thing. And I will tell you that doctor I am still friends with today, and he's one of our investors.
What a cool story.
Thanks.
Well, what problem was MedVector founded to solve?
So it was all about patient access. So in the clinical trials market, there's a catch-22 that happens between the FDA and HIPAA privacy law. So the FDA says you can't market a medicine until you prove that it works and that it's safe, right? That's good. Well, so you have to find people to test the medicine on to prove that it's safe. Well, there's this other thing called HIPAA, and HIPAA prevents you from buying a list of patients who have that ailment. So you can't market it and you can't buy a list. How do you find patients to fill a clinical study? And the answer today is billboards and Facebook ads, which is pretty terrible. So, Carl, I think I asked you this probably the first time we talked, but when was the last time you dialed a phone number off a billboard?
Yeah,
Yeah,
never.
you and everybody else, right? So there becomes this huge problem in getting new medicines to market because you have to get through that FDA barrier and prove that it works and that it's safe on a specific patient population. And so finding those patients becomes inherently difficult, to the point where the average time for a new medication to get to market is between 10 and 14 years, which means that everything that we're putting in our body is over a decade old, which doesn't feel right to me. And so when we're looking at what is making it so slow, it's 90% patient recruitment. And so that, this patient recruitment industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry these days, which is all, a bunch of billion-dollar companies fighting over who's got the best Facebook algorithm, which feels broken.
Yes.
And so the real answer is how do we engage our local physicians to understand what clinical studies are available, just like me, right? Like what happened to me. How do we balance the incentives to where they don't feel like they're just giving their patients away to clinical trial doctors? And so what MedVector has done is we've identified how to collaborate with local physicians to where those patients can now participate in clinical studies from their local doctor's office. And so what does this mean for the local doctors? It means that they're not losing their patients. And for the patient, it means that they don't have to potentially move somewhere to take advantage of the advancements in medicine like I did.
That's interesting, and that actually gets to my next question. So how does your platform make them more accessible to patients at the
Okay. So there's a protocol that exists for a clinical study, and every patient has to follow that same protocol path. So a lot of people don't know this, but there's no variation in a clinical study. There's in no place will a doctor touch a patient and say, it feels like it's getting better. You have to prove that it's getting better, right? To the FDA. So so maybe that's an X-ray, right? And you measure a tumor in an X-ray, and then quite literally measure it with a ruler to prove that it is actually getting smaller. You can't just say, I feel better, therefore the medication works, which is why we do clinical trials. So there's three major components of clinical research. You have the medical procedure, so we're talking the X-ray, right? You've got the interpretation of that X-ray, which would be the assessment. And then you've got the data that's driven from that assessment, okay? So before telemedicine, all three of those things had to happen at the same location. So to give you an example, let's talk about blood pressure. Okay, so blood pressure is a very basic medical procedure that you don't need specific training to do. If you're a nurse, you're licensed to do that, right? So what MedVector has said is okay, so why couldn't any nurse do the procedure? And then the pushback is, well, in order to, who's going to make the assessment? And the assessment requires knowledge of the protocol. So the nurse takes the blood pressure, but you have no idea if it's within tolerance of the protocol. You have no idea if it's safe. So you need somebody that understands the protocol to make the assessment. And then you need somebody who's authorized as a data originator to enter that data. So traditionally, all three of these things would happen at a clinical trial site. Okay. So what MedVector has done is we've said, well, using telemedicine, we essentially could put a patient at two places simultaneously. They could be both at their provider's office physically and virtually at a clinical trial site at the same time. Okay, so the patient's at the provider's office and the provider can do the procedure, and that virtual connection in real time with the clinical trial site team, they then have all the information that they need to make the assessment and enter the data. So basically what we've figured out how to do is using MedVector's proprietary telemedicine technology is patients can now participate in these clinical studies from their local doctor's office without having to go to the clinical trial site.
What a huge advancement that is, to your point.
It opens up a lot of doors, for people, for rural communities and inner city populations. Most of these clinical trial sites are, close to where doctors live, which is typically, suburban, affluent neighborhoods. So somebody in the inner city that, say, has to take a bus to work, well, now they got to take a bus there and back to go participate in this clinical trial, which potentially could eliminate half a day. So now they're sacrificing half a day's pay or maybe even a full day's pay. So it becomes really challenging in participation and access. But even more so than that, we know where the patients are. The patients are behind doctors, but doctors don't refer their patients to clinical trials. So if we can collaborate with these local physicians, well, then they're more likely to share their patient populations with the clinical trial sites. And that's what MedVector does, which is greatly accelerating medicine.
Yes, I see that. What's the reaction been like from the providers and the patients and even your pharma partners?
Well, so the reaction from everyone, it's very much been a win-win-win for everyone involved. The struggle that we've had is with pharma. And the reason that we struggle with it is because our competition is the old way. And so getting something as large as a pharmaceutical company to pivot how they do clinical trials becomes very challenging. And to make matters worse, the clinical trial division within a pharmaceutical company is very siloed. So while they're aware that delays in clinical trials affect the bottom line, they never see any of that. So essentially what happens is the reason it's so important to get medications to market more quickly. I mean, business 101 says like move as quickly as possible, but there's a very interesting underlying factor within the pharmaceutical industry, which is the medical patent itself. So that patent is only a 20-year patent, and the clock for that patent starts ticking the second they file the patent, not the second they start selling it. So if they take 10 to 14 years to get through their clinical trials, well, they only have 6 to 10 years to recoup what's potentially billion dollars, $2 billion in R&D and clinical trial costs, in manufacturing, in marketing and sales. So all of those costs have to be accelerated into this much more narrow window, which is why drug prices are so high. So if we can get these medications to market more quickly, and by more quickly, it should take like 5 years, not 14. And so when we start looking at what is the value of these patents, when we think about a 10-year gap of selling a medicine, that's massive. But even if we think of a 1-year gap or even a 1-day gap, it still becomes pretty big. So there's a medication called Humira that a lot of people are familiar with, and Humira was the number one selling medication for a number of years. Excuse me. And their patent expired a couple years ago. And so we did an analysis of 12 months after their patent expired. So they're still selling a lot of it, right? But what was the delta? What was the difference between what they were selling with the patent versus how much they were selling without the patent? And that's going down every day, right? It's still a really big number, but just the delta between those two was $33.5 million a day.
That's significant.
A day. Yeah. So you understand the how important it should be for these medications to get to market, and the C-suite of the of the pharmaceutical companies recognize that. But the ClinOps department is so siloed. As long as they get it to market before the patent expires, they've done their job. They never feel any of those bonuses because it's at the end. It's not today.
I had no idea that it was that the timing started when the patent was filed.
I didn't either when I got into this.
That's interesting. Well, I mean, you've talked a little bit about HIPAA and other regulatory things. How do you balance that regulatory complexity, especially in the field you're in, with the need for that speed and innovation?
Well, you become an expert in the rules and the compliance. I mean, I don't have to look. Yeah, I don't have to look far to find an FDA guidance. They're everywhere. And we also work, hand in hand with the FDA to make sure that they understand what it is that we're doing, and make sure that we're aligned with what they want as well, right? And and so the point of the FDA, if you stand back far enough, it's to prove efficacy and patient safety using standardized data. So that's it. So when you approach a problem from a different perspective and say, well, now the patient's going to be somewhere else, everybody goes, well, that's a violation of patient safety. When you take a step back and go, why? They said, well, what if there's an adverse event? So an adverse event would be, what if there's a complication with the medicine? Okay. Do you think that happens while they're at the doctor's office? Does that happen during their clinical trial appointment, or does that happen at the middle of the night when they don't feel good, right? And it's in the middle of the night. They end up in the ER, or they get flu-like symptoms. And then what happens? Well, you get flu-like symptoms. You don't think it has anything to do with the new drug that you're taking. You call your doctor. And then your doctor prescribes a potential medication that kicks you out of the study, creates an even bigger complication. So there's a lot of these pieces that are important to understand. And so when we start to take a step back and understand what's the real driver behind this? What is it about the patient safety? Well, we want to make sure that the right person is looking for the right side effects during that visit. Okay, well, so can you still do that via telemedicine? It depends. So that's where we come in to make sure that when we're analyzing a protocol, that we're not putting anything outside that would jeopardize the study, that would jeopardize the patient's safety, or the data integrity. And so an interesting thing about data integrity is it's actually safer to have someone collect data that isn't associated with the study than it is for somebody that is associated with the study. Because somebody that's associated with the study might do something like, let's say it's a questionnaire. They might say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel today versus yesterday? Oh, well, I feel like an 8. Really? Are you sure? An 8? That seems high. That would be data manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas somebody that has no idea, they would just say, 8? Okay, I'm going to write 8. And so if like the investigator teams and things like that know, what side effects to look for and how to manipulate an X-ray, I'm not saying that they do. I'm not saying that they do. I'm saying that they could, right? So it is much safer to have a provider that isn't associated taking blood pressure, taking weight, taking basic vitals, because then we know for sure none of it's going to be manipulated.
Interesting. Well, are you currently using any data science, AI, or automation within MedVector's platform or operations?
So there's a lot of space for AI in this industry, just period. And before I get to that question, let me talk about where it does fit really well. So we have this wave of healthcare technology heading our way. I believe it potentially could rival the Industrial Revolution. Not even kidding. Um, and why do I think that? There's so many breakthrough technologies that we have right now, AI being one of them, right? But we've got CRISPR and gene sequencing. We've got stem cell research. We've got gene therapies, and I don't know if you're familiar with CRISPR, but it's a way of manipulating DNA, right? So in genes themselves. So there's a lot of really exciting stuff that's kind of marching down the path, and everybody's exploring with this stuff right now and looking for interventions for them, use cases. And so if you find a use case for it, what is everything going to need before it gets to a human? A clinical trial. So the fact that our clinical trial system is so broken and so slow, it really is hurting humanity, right? With this wave of innovation, because it's creating this dam rather than opening the floodgates and letting everything come through. And so and AI has a huge component of that, because AI is now mixing all of those things together and giving us ideas of, oh crap, never thought of doing that, and then now we're trying that. So AI is a very, very interesting tool, and we actually use AI to analyze our protocols. So these protocols are 150-page documents, and so sometimes a question as simple as, how does the patient take the medicine? Is the pill, is a shot? Is really hard to find without reading that entire protocol. You have to go to the table of contents, and it could take 20 minutes just to answer that simple question. And with AI, I can ask AI, and it says, boom, in less than a second. And so there's a lot of really helpful AI tools that we use in our business for analyzing protocols, and even on a more basic level of having a conversation with like a chat GPT about what do you think the FDA would think about this approach. So even things like that is very interesting because it's able to collect all of the different sides and then form an opinion, and then also give you the areas that you should be careful, which is great for going into a sales meeting because it gives you all of the pushback before you even get there. So that is where we use AI. There are other places that we are going to continue to expand our use of AI. As far as the patient identification, that's a big place right now. But again, you have to have access to that patient database before you can begin to use AI. And that's the real challenge right now. It's not that the AI can't do it. It's how do you connect the databases and get through HIPAA to where you could say, oh, we found a patient and we can give it to you. So that's kind of where we come in, is making sure that we're, instead of contacting the patient directly, we're reaching out to the provider, and then that provider can make that decision on whether or not this is relevant for the patient. And so that's kind of one of the ways that we play very friendly with HIPAA. As far as AI as a buzzword, Carl, it's getting a little annoying.
You think? Well, as we first started talking, when we started talking about this podcast, that's one of the things that I said. I mean, one of the reasons I kind of wanted to do this was to bring some sanity around it, because people can spell it, but that's about it. Everybody knows they need to do something.
Yeah, it's a marketing buzzword.
Yeah, that's right. I'm behind, right? But I mean, in this case though, and you've touched on some of these, but I do see the possibility of AI helping you streamline trial matching, eligibility screening, trial logistics. I mean, there are some opportunities there that could potentially enhance what you guys are trying to do. And I know you know that. I'm just.
Yeah, no, big time. And the one of the questions that I go through, because I'm not the expert, is, is it more of a machine learning for the matching, or is it true AI looking for new pathways? So, which one is going to be, more helpful? I don't know. But I will say, as the CEO of MedVector, I have to constantly tell my team, no, we're not an AI company. Stop telling people that we're an AI company. We use AI, but we're not an AI company. We're not trying to sell. And he's like, but everybody else has AI on their webpage. And I was like, great. Let's be good at what we do, right? Let's not just join the buzzword.
Well, and to me, all my clients and anybody that I work with, I use the term AI assisted, because I think that's really what it is, and I think that's where you get the power, right? The assist people in doing their jobs and things like that. So,
I'm curious, and maybe you can educate me here. Where's the real value? Is it creating your own AI, or is it teaching your workforce how to use AI?
I think
Because
right
there's
now,
a lot of open source AI that is beneficial for people, is where I'm going with that.
well, there is, and so to put that in perspective, I was reading something the other day. There are approximately, at latest count, over 16,000 large language models out there, right? So, I mean, part of this is, to your point.
So why do I need my own?
Well, exactly. Teaching people to use what's out there, but also picking the right tool for the job, right? I mean, in some cases, like, Chat GPT, generative AI can hallucinate at times. So it can give you a false answer with 100% confidence that's the right answer, right? So you have to know, and your team has to
And
know.
I've reminded it sometimes, and then go, "Oh, wow, you're right. I forgot about that."
That's right. So your team has to know, and I think leveraging the technology, training your team on how to use it with what's out there, I think is the best place to start. And there are truly some automation opportunities out there. I mean, I'm working with folks who, a IT managed service provider who wants to automate their tier one support, right? That's a good application for that if you have the knowledge and the data that's sufficient to be able to train the tool to be able to do it. In a lot of cases, that's the first place you need to go because people don't really, well, they're starting to, but in the past that hasn't really been a big deal or a big priority. But to leverage AI correctly and build some of those models, you really have to have the data in a way that it can train it and fine tune the model to your use case.
So, all right. So let me spin the interview on you here for a second. You being the expert, when would someone know? When would I know that I need my own AI versus something else that's out?
Well, I think what you would do is you would explore the options that are out there to you, available to you. And let's talk about the models that are out there, right? So the LLMs that are out there, the chat GPTs of the world. I think what you would do is you would explore those, you would look through those, see what's available on the market today, and see if any of those met your needs. And then typically one way to solve that, if it's something that's not quite there that you're looking for, then you pick one that closest meets your needs and then do fine tuning and training on that model to make it more specific for your use case.
Okay. So you would come in and not build an AI, you would build the system that uses the AI.
I mean, that would be, yeah. I'm always one of those people that I would prefer to use what's out there than building your own, because when you start doing that, you're not an AI, you're not a software development company either, right? And you don't want to be.
That's what I keep telling my team. I'm like, no, the last thing we need to do is confuse our customers any further. Like,
That being said, there are tools out there today where it will write the code for you, right? You just tell it what you're looking to do. So, I mean, I think over time it's going to get easier and easier to use these tools. But right now, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think educating your team on what's available, what's out there, and then begin to walk them through and slowly utilizing that to improve your efficiencies or help you in areas that like some of the things we talked about. Maybe even intelligent assistance for your patients or care teams and things like that. Chat bots, some of those kind of things that may be beneficial. Of course, you got to be careful with that too, because not all of those work either.
I just thought of a good use case that maybe we should start a company about, but a adverse event or side effect detection, facial recognition, like, because the physician isn't going to have the memory to know whether you look flush or pale. And so looking at all of the, as an image, to be able to see hair loss at its early stages, that'd be pretty cool.
Or even, remote monitoring devices, like for example, heart monitors or whatever, any things like that might be able to detect something and have.
Yeah, and detect it early. Yeah,
Right.
that'd be cool.
So, yeah. So, I mean,
I think Apple's working on that. I think that's a big driver for their watches, is collecting all of that healthcare data to where they can, when people do have heart attacks, they can look to see if there was any like odd precursors a week before or a month before.
yeah. So, I mean, it just, so I think there's opportunities out there. But kind of to your point, you have to crawl before you can walk.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Cool. Well, so what else you got for me?
What's been your biggest operational challenges as you scaled? Is it tech, talent, data, or something else?
So I think we're a little bit different with this answer because ours is adoption. Adoption has been the hardest cog, because we were able to raise capital, we were able to build our tech, we were able to get all of the pieces in place, and everybody was on board. And then we just ran into a very strange phenomenon in pharma specifically, which is pharma's kind of broken right now to where it's an industry that must be rooted in innovation, right? So it's not Ford where it can just re-release the Mustang, right? There's a patent, so they have to have something else in the pipeline, and so it has to be rooted in innovation. And right now, the pendulum has swung so far toward caution and away from innovation that they seem to be valuing caution over innovation. So, and the way that I like to explain it, and it's the craziest thing. Typically, when you're in a executive meeting or a brainstorming meeting, it's the people that are the most proactive that get promoted, right? It's the ones that are looking to solve the problem and are coming to the table and bringing energy and putting the business's profitability first. Those are the ones that typically get promoted. Well, pharma, it's not. The smartest person in the room in pharma is the person who raises their hand and can identify the risk that nobody else could see, which is there's value to that, right? But when all of a sudden you have a culture of promoting these people, essentially what you've done is you've created an entire infrastructure of the best people in the world at saying no. So think about it. What happens to innovation when all the people are only thinking about risk? Squashed. And so right now we're in this very strange situation where there's grant proposals out for companies like ours from the government to strong arm pharma to change. And usually it's the other way around. Usually it's the government trying to pull back on innovation, right? And it's usually the businesses that want to go as fast as they can, right? And it's the government wanting to pull back. Think about AI, right? So it's the industry wants to just go, and the government's going, maybe we should need to have some sort of regulation around this, right? That's normal. That's how it should be. It is backwards in the pharmaceutical industry right now. The FDA is leading innovation, and the FDA should be the speed limit. They should be controlling innovation. And so that is probably the biggest frustration and the biggest problem that we've had and that the industry has. And so it's very much of just, well, that's not how we do it. And even like I can bring a guidance to a meeting and go, it says right here that it's okay. And they go, oh, well, yeah, maybe for some studies, but not ours. What? So that's been my biggest frustration.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, does MedVector, does it integrate with the electronic health records that are out there? And, what platforms does it integrate with?
So we do not, and we do not intentionally because of that HIPAA privacy, and data integration is a really big pain. And so if there's in fact, we have our own device, our own telemedicine device, which is right there. I'll show you. Why not? So this is the MedVector window. And so the reason that we have this is because we can control the entire experience. And not only control the experience, but any data entry that's happening. We can control the Wi-Fi capabilities. We don't have, and so our devices have their own hotspots built into them. So we don't even have to plug into the local doctor's office Wi-Fi because a lot of times that needs IT approval from the hospital that might not even be at the same location. So data integration is something that we try to keep our distance from. In fact, nothing is even entered into our device. We like everything to be verbally transmitted rather than entered and then re-entered. It has to do with source data.
Gotcha. Are there internal processes like onboarding, training, analytics that you'd like to improve or automate?
Yes, but we're not there yet. So yes, I mean, there's a ton of things within this business line that could be automated. As far as protocol selection, site selection, even physician recommendations, and then even patient identification. So once we are plugged into a physician's computer, we can help them, find those patients that are good fits. So yes, there's a whole. So it's like Uber, right? So there's a whole bunch of IP and bells and whistles that can happen, under the radar or, within the app that nobody sees. And so yes, there's a ton of that we can do, but we haven't we haven't needed it just yet.
What metrics matter most to your operations team, right?
Conversion rates is a big one. So, right now the conversion rate for actual leads that go to a clinical trial site is less than 1%. So this is a patient recruitment company that identifies, actually, I shouldn't say less than 1%. On average, it's less than 1%. Some of the good ones are like 7% or something like that, but they're still terrible. Okay. But a lead that goes from a patient recruitment company to a clinical trial site, they still have to pick up the phone and do a cold call to that patient. That conversion rate of that patient is still terrible. Okay. What makes it better is if their doctor talks to them about it, which is what we do,
Yeah.
right? And so our conversion rates are 40% plus. So that in itself is a huge, huge component of filling studies more quickly, is that conversion rate.
Well, what's your vision for MedVector in the next 3 to 5 years? I mean, where's the company going next?
Well, so the industry hopefully is going to fully decentralize clinical trials. And so what does that mean? Well, right now, the patient goes to the clinical trial site for every visit. MedVector says maybe they don't have to go for every visit. Maybe the more complicated ones, they go to the clinical trial site, but the easier ones, they go to their provider's office. And that's how we create that access to the patient populations, by collaborating with those physicians. Well, where the industry is headed is fully decentralized clinical study, meaning no visits happen at the clinical trial site. They all happen at the local provider's office. So, or what happens is we can substitute that provider with any other type of data owner. So an example of that would be, how about CVS? So CVS has these minute clinics, and they have all this patient data, and they have no way to monetize it. So this is a way that CVS could do their own patient recruitment. Then we put a device at the CVS Minute Clinic. That study is run completely decentralized, and then we can compensate CVS for giving us access to their facility. And so that's how you eliminate the patient recruitment problem completely. Is what happens is as MedVector grows, the pharmaceutical company will give us a protocol. We will do our little AI thing and look for the inclusion exclusion criteria and who's the right fit, and then we'll distribute that to all of our data partners. So CVS, LabCorp, the UK, Canada, like these are social medicine countries. These are big patient databases, right? So we can distribute the what we're looking for to all of these different places that have their own patient data. We don't want the data. We don't need the data. And then when they identify those patients, well, then we facilitate those interactions like Uber, right? So Uber doesn't buy cars. Uber doesn't drive cars. They find people that need rides and connect them with people who already have rides, right? So MedVector is very similar in that. And so as it gets closer and closer and closer to fully decentralized, as I mentioned, social medicine countries, right? So we had a conversation with Finland, and Finland has 5 million citizens on a single database. It has everything from every parking ticket to every pill they've ever ingested. And they talked to us, and they said, so let me get this straight. If we give you access to our patient population, you'll bring American advanced medicine to our country for free, and you'll pay us in US dollars at pharma pricing? Remember, social medicine, they pay for every x-ray themselves. The answer is yeah, without blinking an eye. That's GDP for our country. So where's this going? This is where this is going, right? So now you've got fully decentralized studies. You've got all of the patients that you could possibly have. Diversity is no longer an issue, both geographically and biologically. And now clinical trial sites can be essentially call centers where they're, in affordable neighborhoods in the middle of Illinois, right? And they're open 24 hours a day, and they just follow the sun around the world. And you can have language translation that's all HIPAA compliant built into them. And now you've got studies running around the clock out of these call centers. The clinical trial expenses go way down. The throughput of positive medications into the world go way up. And so everything gets better for everybody. That's where it's going.
It's awesome. All right. If you had an unlimited budget and compute, what would you build tomorrow?
An unlimited budget. Wait, that was an unlimited budget for what?
Unlimited budget and compute. So,
So all the systems.
yeah.
I would buy a pharmaceutical. I would buy a pharmaceutical company, and I would lead by example on how to get back into innovation. and right now, the pharmaceutical industry is broken. And so I'm an ex-analyst, so I don't know if you knew that about me, but I was an options strategist for Morgan Stanley. So I'm a high finance guy, and I follow market dynamics very closely. What you see when an industry is in trouble, you see consolidation and layoffs. And that's what we're seeing right now in the pharmaceutical industry. Now, that doesn't mean the pharmaceutical industry is going away. What it means is the big boys, the Novartises of the world, are so afraid to do their own R&D, they're buying other smaller companies and then running the clinical trials, which is taking too long. And now the drug prices are getting more and more and more expensive because this model doesn't work. And so that's what we're starting to see is we're seeing a lot of consolidation and layoffs to get rid of him, the pharma dino.
I see that. I was looking at the board behind you there. So, well, for healthcare and or research leaders trying to modernize clinical trials, what's one piece of advice you'd give them?
It would be stop being scared. Stop being scared of the FDA. The FDA, the FDA can be a huge thorn in your side, but the FDA is not trying to be a thorn in your side. The FDA is rooting for innovation. They just want to make sure that it's done properly and that they eliminate any fraud that exists. So stop being afraid of the FDA. Stop being afraid the clinical trial sites are so afraid of the pharmaceutical companies that pay them. The pharmaceutical companies are so afraid of the clinical trial sites. They're so afraid to rock the boat with the clinical trial sites because they don't want to disturb them. They don't want them to quit. So everybody's afraid of everybody. And it just eliminates any sort of collaboration or synergistic that exists in every other industry in the world.
What's the best way for our listeners to connect with you or learn more about MedVector?
You can go to medvector.com. That's the best way to connect with the team. We've got some explainer videos out there that shows exactly what we do. And, through you, if the right person, had a question that I'd be happy to take some time.
Well, Scott, thank you for joining us today. MedVector's model is bold, timely, and critically important, not just for research efficacy, but for equity and accessibility in trials. To our listeners, if today's episode sparked questions or opportunities around automation, AI strategy, or scaling intelligent platforms, we'd love to connect. Visit us at Protelligent.com or follow Edge of Intelligence wherever you get your podcast.